another top official with classified documents where they shouldn't be, with letters our team is getting from the lawyers for former Vice President Mike Pence, sharing they found stuff at his Indiana home. We've got the reaction from Capitol Hill on what looks like a growing problem, including part of my conversation with the top Democrat about what all this means for President Biden's own classified document situation. Plus, just into us in the last maybe 45 minutes or so, we've got a tornado moving through a suburb of Houston. A look at where these storms may be headed next. And we're live now in 2 California cities dealing with horrific mass shootings. New details on more lives lost and what investigators are finding. Plus, the FDA laying out some new limits on something you probably didn't even think was in baby food at all, lead. We're talking with a doctor on how high levels of this stuff can obviously hurt kids' development. And in tonight's original, we're hearing from retail investors, quote unquote, the people who made a ton of money on stocks like GameStop, why some are now getting out of the game altogether later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and let's start by walking through what we know and what we do not know about these classified documents found at the home of former Vice President Mike Pence, a development happening late today. So here's what we know so far based on letters from Pence's attorneys sent to the National Archives obtained by NBC News. They say it's a small number of documents that ended up at Pence's house in Indiana. The attorney says they were inadvertently boxed up and transported to the house. That word, inadvertent, that's important. We'll talk about why. They also say the former VP didn't even know they were there. They actually apparently started looking after the documents were found at President Biden's home. So Pence's team basically said, hey, we'll check your house, too. We still have a lot of questions on this, right? What exactly do these Pence documents say? What topics do they cover? Will there be a special counsel here for Mike Pence, just like there was one for the other former and current president here? And what's up with all these classified documents? Are we classifying too much? Are people handling them poorly? There's a lot of reaction coming in on this from Capitol Hill. Watch.
Well, I kind of thought, holy heck.
What the hell's going on around here is my reaction.
What became a political problem, for Republicans is now a national security problem for the country.
Let's remember how all of this started, right? How we even started talking about classified documents in the first place with the search of former President Trump's home in Florida, when in total, something like 13,000 documents were discovered. This whole fight escalated a couple weeks ago when we first learned about President Biden's own document issues, leading to today. Now, President Biden himself, he is not talking about the Pence discovery. There he is. He was wrapping up a meeting with top Democrats in Congress at the White House. The White House press secretary going with a no comment here, leaving questions up to the counsel's office. Our White House correspondent Monica Alba is joining us now. Monica, so this is like the landscape of like classified documents in Washington. You heard some reaction from the top 2 senators on the Intelligence Committee. What the heck? Or holy heck, and what the hell is going on, right? I mean, I think that aptly sums up the bipartisan frustration here. What is also clear from my conversations with Democrats on the Hill is that they are taking pains to say, well, this is frustrating. The Biden-Pence document issues are of a different shade and type than the Donald Trump document issues.
I think that's an absolutely fair way to put things, Hallie. And yes, it was a head-spinning development. It made sort of everybody go, wait a second, what? More? Where? How? And those questions still remain very big questions that haven't been answered here. And I think when you put that timeline on the screen there, where we're talking about the fact that the FBI seizure of classified records from Mar-a-Lago was last August, just a couple of months ago, former Vice President Pence said in a major interview, I didn't take any classified information with me from the White House. And now fast forward to what we're learning today just took place in the last week or so. And I think it was clear from all of the information and the pressure that the White House, the current sitting president, was under, given the fact that that FBI search had to take place at his home for additional documents, that is where you saw former Vice President Pence, a potential candidate for 2024, look around and say, OK, we should maybe really double, triple check and make sure there isn't anything here that could be classified. And so that is what you saw happening. But then you do see this reaction from lawmakers, and it is hard for some Republicans to figure out what to make of it, because at some point they don't want to give that much attention to former President Trump's case, but they're also lauding former Vice President Pence for what they say is doing the right thing, which is when he found out about this, he did properly alert the authorities that are key here, Hallie.
Let me play for you part of my conversation with Senator Tammy Duckworth about whether there is a broader issue here. Because, again, while there are different buckets, as you have laid out here, maybe the Donald Trump bucket and then the Joe Biden, Mike Pence bucket, like, none of the buckets are good in the eyes of people who talk about intelligence and who understand the importance of handling classified documents appropriately. Let me play for you what she had to tell me. Your thoughts on the idea that there is perhaps a systemic problem here, given what we've seen now with these three leaders, different situations, but these three leaders?
Well, I am deeply concerned that there has been mishandling of classified documents. You know, as a soldier, if I had been caught with a classified document at home, I would have been in a lot of trouble.
Are you getting any sense from the folks you're talking to at the White House and the executive branch that, yes, maybe some kind of a systemic change is needed here?
I do think there is a sense here from this White House that does say President Biden takes this classified material very seriously, that all sensitive government documents should be handled with care, but that maybe there is an explanation perhaps for some other things, like when we're talking about schedules, when we're talking about things that at the time, however many years ago, in the moment could have been deemed classified, but would they certainly have any importance now from a national security perspective? I think you're seeing that enter the narrative a little bit here, but I also just thought it was notable, Hallie, this White House hasn't commented at all on the former vice president's case, because I think they're happy to let that dominate the conversation for a little bit here and take away from the own issues they're facing with the special counsel investigation.
No sense from the Department of Justice. We don't know yet if they're going to put a special counsel in place on this Pence thing, right? No word from the AG yet?
We don't know, and he was very quick to say yesterday that he will treat both parties the same as he has done in the past, Hallie.
Monica Alba live for us there on the White House North Lawn. Mon, thank you. Appreciate it. In just the last hour, we saw a tornado moving through a Houston suburb, damaging trees, damaging buildings, all part of this massive storm system that's developing in the south. Here's some of the first pictures we're seeing of some of this stuff. Pasadena, Texas. It's 15 miles outside of Houston. That's the leftovers, if you will. Debris everywhere. Look at that. Looks like somebody's gutter came down. Here's what one person who watched it all is telling our team.
You could hear the tree crack and stuff hitting the house. It happened real quick. As soon after it was going on about 30 seconds, I got in the closet.
That's scary stuff right there, and it may not be the last tornado we see. More could be possible through tomorrow morning, with something like 12 million plus people under a severe storm threat, more than 20 million people under a high wind alert. This storm is expected to move northeast and maybe bring snow from New Mexico to Maine. Bill Cairns is joining us now. Bill, talk us through the potential for tornado activity, which is obviously a big concern as evening falls, as it gets darker, and as people start to go to bed.
So, Hallie, this is not a tornado outbreak like we had like a week and a half ago through Alabama. So far, we've only had 2 reports of tornadoes. The first one didn't do any damage, and the second one, we just showed you the pictures of that. So we have the potential today for isolated, strong tornadoes, and that's what it looks like it happened in Deer Park and Pasadena, the pictures we just showed you. Not devastating. It didn't tear like the homes from their foundations, but it did damage roofs. We haven't heard of any injuries or fatalities from that. But first responders are literally, it's only been 90 minutes, are going to the scenes right now. Roads are all blocked off and closed. So we did have a tornado warning for the Beaumont, Texas area, and that has been dropped. But now we have a new tornado warning just south of there. So this is that same line that produced that tornado right here near Pearland, Baytown. This is where Pasadena and Deer Park are located. So that line is now heading towards Louisiana. And again, isolated tornadoes are possible. So the tornado watch is continuing up until about 6 p.m. this evening Central Time. There'll be a new tornado watch that will include areas like Lake Charles, New Iberia, and New Orleans. So New Orleans, again, Hallie, that's not going to be for about another 4 to 5 hours. Nocturnal, nighttime tornadoes can be very dangerous if they happen.
Talk through then this sort of double whammy that people in the Northeast are going to deal with too.
Right, so we got the severe weather side of this, but then we also have the snowy side. And there's a lot of Americans included in this. 82 million people included in winter weather advisories or warnings. We've had 7 inches of snow in Lubbock, Texas, and now the snow is going to start heading towards St. Louis, Indianapolis later tonight, tomorrow morning around Detroit, and then Wednesday through areas of the Northeast. But once again, miss for I-95 cities. New York City, Philadelphia, D.C., no snow for you, but we are going to wake up to snow tomorrow morning in areas of northern Arkansas, Arkansas, a lot in Missouri. St. Louis, 2 to 4 inches for you, but Indianapolis could be one of the highlights. About 6 to 8 inches of snow for you. I'm sure tomorrow is going to be a snow day for many kids in the state. And then we'll watch this, Hallie. It's mostly northern New England. We'll see the significant stuff. So D.C. to New York, still no snow in the forecast. The snow drought continues.
Phil Cairns, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll talk again tomorrow. Appreciate it. We are learning more about the lives lost in the second mass shooting in California in just the last 48 hours. 7 people shot and killed, another person hurt at this shooting at 2 different farms in the community of Half Moon Bay. That's about 30 miles south of San Francisco. It's pretty agricultural. Marciano Martinez Jimenez was one of those people who was killed. He was 50 years old. His family telling NBC News he was an excellent person, responsible, always there to give a helping hand. We're also getting some more details about the shooting itself, with officials saying the evidence right now points to this being a case of workplace violence. They say this is something that this smaller coastal town has never seen before. They've never had to deal with something like this. The suspect, is in custody now. They found him in his car in the parking lot of a sheriff's substation at a strip mall. This is actually some video of the arrest that officers made in that location. And we're also just finding out tonight that the president has spoken with California Governor Gavin Newsom about this. We found out that Vice President Harris would be headed to the state, he said, as the president reiterates, right, that in this moment, after a horrific 72 hours in that state, his heart is with them. Watch.
The floods and the devastation that occurred, and then on top of that, we see what's happened in California. And what's happened to the Asian American community has been devastating.
Look at this. Look at what's on your screen here. This is just in the last week. 24 people dead in mass shootings in that state. And then pull back, right? It's not just California. Pull back to this country as a whole. There have been more mass shootings than days in January so far this year. 39 mass shootings in 2023. It is only January 24th. You see the number of people killed, 70. In those attacks. Miguel Almaguer is in Half Moon Bay for us. Miguel, officials say they're still looking into this suspect, who this person is, as we're getting some new reporting from the San Francisco Chronicle that he may have tried to suffocate one of his co-workers 10 years ago. Tell us more about what we know, what we're learning, where this investigation is going.
Well, that's right, Hallie. There has been some disturbing findings about the suspect. NBC News has also uncovered its own findings about the suspect, that a restraining order was issued against the suspect by his roommate after he allegedly threatened to attack him after a dispute they had. So police earlier today said he did not have a significant criminal history. That's what they've been telling us so far. But there's been some kind of new developments here in the case when looking through the legal system, that he did have a couple of run-ins with law. Police, though, again saying nothing of serious significance. But it does appear, though, they have their suspect. They say they cornered this 62-year-old inside his vehicle with an handgun inside, with an automatic weapon, semi-automatic weapon inside the vehicle when he was detained by police, Hallie.
Well, officials are calling this, they believe, suspected workplace violence. So it is not surprising that there's speculation that perhaps the suspect may have known the victims. The question is, we don't know much about these victims yet. Police haven't released the names. They're still working to identify them. And they call that a unique challenge in this instance, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, investigators say there's several hurdles they face in identifying these victims. They say there was a lot of people who were working at both different locations. Not all of them had IDs on them. Everybody after the shooting scrambled out of the area, and families have been struggling to find out who's missing and who may be dead. Investigators say they are working to notify all of the victims' families. As you mentioned, 7 people pronounced dead. An 8th person was rushed to a local hospital, taken there in critical condition. But at last report, according at least to investigators, that person was doing better and is now in stable condition. Some semblance of good news here after just a horrific 24 hours here, Hallie.
Horrific, to say the least. Miguel Almaguer, thank you very much. Live for us there in Half Moon Bay, California. We also are just learning moments ago that Vice President Harris officially will also be in that state, in California tomorrow, further south from where Miguel is, down in Monterey Park. She will be there to honor the victims of the mass shooting in that community, according to a White House official. 11 lives taken, stolen, really, with officials releasing the names of all the victims now. Take a look. These are them. These are the people who were killed in a senseless shooting in this country. There is a small glimmer of good news in all of this. We now know that one of the surviving victims of the shooting is now out of the hospital, a woman who is 73 years old. The hospital is hopeful that the other two people that they're caring for will also recover. So many thoughts and prayers that that will be the case. Still a huge question mark here on motive, right? Why did the 72-year-old suspected shooter go and attack two dance studios outside L.A.? Law enforcement sources are telling NBC News a preliminary investigation suggests the motive was personal, not related to terrorism or a hate crime. Kathy Park is joining us now. And Kathy, police are really clear that this investigation, even several days after this shooting over the weekend, is still in its early stages. But even now, we're getting more hints, more clues as they put these puzzle pieces together.
Hallie, that is absolutely right. So as you mentioned, the motive remains a mystery at this hour, but law enforcement sources, as you said, have told NBC News that it's likely personal in nature, not related to a hate crime or terrorism related as well. But obviously the investigation is still ongoing. But I can tell you that yesterday officials actually went to the gunman's home in Hemet, California, which is roughly around 80 miles east of Los Angeles, and they were able to retrieve a couple of things, a rifle, first of all, several rounds of ammunition, and they also found several pieces of equipment actually to make silencer firearm suppressors. So, excuse me, let me clarify that. They found electronic devices and items for manufacturing firearm suppressors. And right now, officials are saying that the individual had a limited criminal history, but was arrested in 1990 for unlawful possession of a firearm.
Let me look ahead to a vigil in Monterey Park that's set to start in just a few hours from now. This is a tight-knit community, as people have described it here. And now they're going to take a moment to, like the vice president will do tomorrow, honor the lives lost here. Talk to us about what you're hearing from people in this community about this, you know, this piece of national news that they are forced to be a part of now because of this act of violence.
Yeah, so obviously, Hallie, many residents here are still shaken by this tragedy, and this is a largely Asian community, and many people tell me that this was personal because it happened during Lunar New Year celebrations, which is perhaps one of the most sacred and important holidays for the Asian community. In fact, yesterday we had a chance to speak with Hong Nguyen. He is a resident of Monterey Park, and he also works in this community. And we were able to ask him questions about how this moment has shaken him and how they plan on moving forward. Take a listen.
This community is strong. Our AAPI community is strong. But, you know, as with every shootings we've seen in America, which happen way too often, we've seen that it changed the fabric of the community. Hopefully, we're able to come together and be stronger.
And Hallie, as the healing begins, we know that resources are being made available for members of this community. Meanwhile, we're in front of the place where the shooting took place, the studio, the ballroom, and there is a growing memorial, but obviously a lot of healing ahead.
Kathy Park live for us there in Monterey Park, California. Kathy, thank you very much for your reporting. Appreciate it. Let's take it to Georgia now, where a judge there looks like he may release at least part of a grand jury's report on an investigation into former President Trump's alleged election interference in that state in 2020. We just may not see it anytime soon. Now, the grand jury says it should be made public, but the Fulton County District Attorney, Fani Willis, disagrees. Watch.
We have to be mindful of protecting future defendants' rights in the interest of justice and the rights of not the state, but others. We are asking that the report not be released.
Remember, this case stems from the lies told by former President Trump when he called Georgia's Secretary of State and asked him to find the votes after his loss in Georgia. Public filings also show this grand jury has looked at a false elector scheme, pressure on an election worker, and copying data from election equipment. Blaine Alexander joins us now. And I just want to, we like to pull back the curtain a bit. That's the only camera we have in the courtroom, which is why you're seeing the DA's back there. And she said something that is probably the bigger headline out of all this, which is that charges are imminent. That is a significant clue as to what is going to happen in the days or weeks to come. Talk us through that.
You know, Hallie, I've got to say that we've spent a lot of time this afternoon since she dropped that word. My producer, Charlie Guile, and I trying to figure out exactly what imminent
does that
means. And so that really kind of is where, what does that mean? Does it mean a couple of days? You know, that's one of the things. We don't know the timeline for all of this. And also, there's nothing to stop her from going to a regular grand jury right now. You know, who's to say whether she's doing that or not? I will say, though, that it is certainly fair to say that once she makes that decision and she's ready, that will become public. She will make that announcement as to what that decision looks like. Later on in that hearing, though, this is important to note, you know, one of the people from her office who was also speaking to the judge essentially said that they're not going to oppose the release of this report forever. They said that eventually it will become public. They're not trying to block it forever. They just want to wait until after she's made a decision and made that decision public. They say that's when they believe that'll be the responsible time to really have this conversation, Hallie.
There was somebody we didn't hear from in court today, attorneys for former President Trump. Explain that, why they wouldn't be there to make the case and they're in person here.
You know, his legal team put out a statement last night, his Georgia legal team, essentially saying that they were not going to be there. They're not going to be present. They're not going to participate because they said up until this point, you know, the former president hasn't had any involvement in the process. They say that he was neither subpoenaed to come before the special grand jury, nor was he asked to come voluntarily. I want to read you a little portion of that statement that they put out. They said, we can assume that the grand jury did their job and looked at the facts and the law as we have and concluded that there were no violations of the law by President Trump. So that's a statement from his legal team here in Georgia. And that's why, you know, we didn't hear from them. But it is important to point out the only parties that we heard from today were representatives for the media and the DA's office.
That's right. And so let me just recap kind of the biggest headline, big headline, imminent charges. TBD, you and Charlie are working on what does imminent mean. Fine. We'll find out at some point. Second big thing is, will this grand jury report be made public? It doesn't matter that the grand jury itself wants it to be. What are the breadcrumbs from the judge? And explain why that would be so interesting to look at for people who have followed this as you have for months now.
Yeah, you know, he was an equal opportunity, tough questioner on both sides. So really, we don't know which way he's leaning. But certainly, this is a judge that has been in charge of this, overseeing this from the very beginning. He knows perhaps better than anybody the intense public interest in all of this. So no doubt he'll take that into account when it comes to his decision. As for what we're looking for, well, we do know that as of today, we know that there were 75 witnesses that were called. So looking in that report, we would likely get some more names that we don't know who actually came forward and testified under oath. That'll be interesting. And then, of course, what sort of recommendations this special grand jury made from hearing that testimony, and perhaps a peek into what was said behind those closed doors, Hallie.
Blaine Alexander live for us there in Atlanta. Blaine, always good to see you. Thank you. Today, NBC News is learning the Biden administration plans to send several dozen high-tech tanks to Ukraine, according to multiple senior defense officials, who tell us the administration is notifying Congress about the decision to send these Abrams tanks today. And then the sort of a formal notification publicly will come out of the White House probably tomorrow. This really matters, right? This matters beyond the obvious, which is like, you know, big machines going to Ukraine to fight Russia. It matters because this move will probably push Germany to do the same thing and send their tanks to Ukraine. There'd been some disagreement over whether this should happen at all, because these Abrams tanks are a lot to train on. They're a lot to maintain. That was the concern from the defense secretary, for example, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff as well. NBC's Raf Sanchez is joining us now. Setting aside like whether these are the right weapons for the fight in Ukraine right now, it looks like it is going to happen, at least to the tune of a couple dozen of these tanks. What are you hearing about this decision on the Ukrainian side on this?
Yeah, Hallie, as you said, just as recently as a couple of days ago, U.S. officials were listing all the reasons why it didn't make sense to send Abrams tanks here to Ukraine. They're absolute gas guzzlers. They can go through a gallon of gas a minute. They are very difficult to maintain. As far as we can tell, that military assessment hasn't changed. What has changed, Hallie, is the politics. The Biden administration seems to have decided it was important to give Germany the political cover the Germans felt they needed to release their own tanks, the Leopard tanks. And as you said, this is a couple of dozen American tanks. These are formidable tanks. They will be highly appreciated here in Ukraine by fighters on the battlefield, but it's a couple of dozen. There are 2,000 of these German-made Leopard tanks here in Europe. All the spare parts, crucially, are here in Europe. So those tanks could be here in Ukraine in very, very large numbers. As for Ukrainian officials, They have been absolutely pulling their hair out, watching the NATO allies go in circles on this issue of tanks, and they are just so relieved that it does finally appear a decision has been reached, and they hope these tanks are going to reach the battlefield in time to make a difference before Vladimir Putin launches a new offensive, potentially in a couple of weeks, Sally.
You talk about the political backdrop here at home. There is something else happening as it relates to the political backdrop in the Ukrainian government, with the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, moving to try to contain kind of a corruption scandal here. We're listing the names of all of these top governmental officials who were either dismissed or who had to resign just in the last sort of little bit here. This is a fairly significant shakeup, probably the biggest one since the war started, of the Ukrainian government here. What does it mean for the war push?
Yeah, this is a major shakeup, and Hallie, it goes right to the heart of President Zelensky's circle. The top official there is his own deputy chief of staff. This is a man who has been very close to Zelensky since even before he got into politics. Remember, Zelensky was a comedian before. This guy was his producer back in the world of entertainment. They rose to the highest level of Ukrainian government together. Very close. This guy has been implicated in a couple of issues. He was seen driving around Kyiv in a new Porsche during wartime, which raised some questions. There were questions about his potential links to an embezzlement scandal. He denies charges, but this is a major, major shakeup of Ukraine's wartime government, Hallie.
It feels like this was a move by Volodymyr Zelensky to try to send a signal to Western allies to say, we are not misusing your money. Basically, keep it coming. I mean, is that fair?
That is a big part of it, but what people here say is really encouraging, Hallie, is these scandals were uncovered by Ukrainian media. They were amplified by Ukrainian civil society. And people say this is actually what a free and democratic country should be doing, should be self-correcting under what are obviously the most extreme circumstances here during war. Hallie?
Raf Sanchez, live for us there in Kharkiv, Ukraine. Raf, thank you so much for your reporting on the ground. Appreciate it. Coming up, why some scientists, brace yourselves, say the world is closer to catastrophe than ever, and where they're putting the hands on that so-called doomsday clock. Plus, senators sounding off at a hearing on the power of Ticketmaster and that botched Taylor Swift sale. We'll tell you who a top executive is pointing the finger at instead. Coming up. The head of Live Nation Entertainment today apologizing for all those problems that left millions of Taylor Swift fans without the chance to get concert tickets in November, but also shifting blame to a whole bunch of bots that he says attacked Ticketmaster's servers, which he says forced the company to pause its sales for Swift's Eras tour. This all came out as senators were pushing the Live Nation president and CFO about why the company doesn't have technology that can tell the difference between a bot and like a real human customer. But bots are only part of the issue. Senator Ted Cruz asking the witnesses, including entertainment industry CEOs, analysts, whether or not Ticketmaster and Live Nation are a monopoly in this business. Watch.
I mean, your judgment, is Ticketmaster a monopoly?
Unequivocally.
Mr. Mickelson?
Yes, sir, without a doubt.
Mr. Nuzzo?
Yes, absolutely.
So, Mr. Berchtold, do you agree with the other witnesses on this panel?
We absolutely believe the ticketing business has never been more competitive.
Okay, Savannah Sellers is joining us now. And Savannah, that is such an interesting moment there because it gets to the heart of what a lot of this hearing was about. Not just like on its face, yeah, Taylor Swift, the ticket debacle, et cetera, but it was about deeper issues. Does Ticketmaster and Live Nation, do they have too much of a monopoly on this industry here?
Absolutely, Hallie. That is the question. First of all, let me just full disclosure this. I am a Swiftie without tickets who is in that queue. Okay. No, not yet. I mean, unless I'm going to pay, you know, some exorbitant price, which is really kind of what the heart of this is at here. So yes, you can't regulate, you know, the emotions that people feel about Taylor Swift or make her less of this mega super famous pop star that she is. But you can look at the fact that Ticketmaster and Live Nation really do have what they are calling anyway, a monopoly on this industry. What witnesses today called a monopoly on this industry, because they have this combination of multiple things. It's concert promotion, and then there's actually the ownership of venues, and then there's the ticket sales, which is really what fans have been focused on right now after, as you mentioned, the Eras tour sale, of course. But it's that kind of triumvirate of those three things there that mean that artists essentially have to go through Ticketmaster. We actually did hear from a singer-songwriter today in this hearing who's one of the witnesses. His name is Clyde Lawrence, and he said, look, they promote our concert, then we have our concert in one of their venues, and then, of course, our tickets were sold using using Ticketmaster. And a lot of times he said there's finger pointing in terms of where do those extra fees come from? Is it the venue or is it the ticket seller? But guess what? In most cases, those are the same people. It's Live Nation, who's the parent company of all of this. But senators did say, Hallie, that look, having these witnesses under oath in this hearing today could be helpful because there is this reported Justice Department investigation into Ticketmaster. Swifties just might be the fans to do this, even though this has been under investigation for quite some time. Of course, Pearl Jam tried to do this at one point, but we'll see if these Swifties, Hallie, can really take on Ticketmaster.
Pearl Jam, by the way, a musical group that was popular in the early 90s, just to be clear for people.
Exactly.
You know, we've made it through this entire discussion without, like, dropping Taylor Swift song lyrics, I think, at least that I know of. Lawmakers could not do the same. They could not help themselves. I want you to watch.
Can't have too much consolidation, something that unfortunately for this country, as a ode to Taylor Swift, I will say we know all too well.
Ticketmaster ought to look in the mirror and say, I'm the problem. It's me.
Karma's a relaxing thought. Aren't you envious that for you it's not?
Okay, so they or their kids listen to Taylor Swift, whose lyrics are now in the congressional record, fine. But part of this is she does, you described her as, I think, a mega super famous pop star. She is, and that is why there is a spotlight on this issue at all, right? Without this debacle, would Congress be having this hearing? That's an open question.
It is, you know, and it's actually one that I posed to Senator Klobuchar right before she went into the hearing. And she said, look, this no doubt is what got my colleagues' attention. It is the reason that we are having a hearing right now. So look, I mean, Swifties may have masterminded this. There's a reference, Hallie. I worked one in. I'm a little zapped. Otherwise, I would have been doing like 10 of these already. But yes, it is most certainly that is a catalyst for what's happening right now. And that's actually also what lawmakers were calling this entire hearing, a catalyst for potential change down the line. One of the people that you just heard there was Senator Blumenthal, of course, and one of the things that he pushed today was he's trying to reintroduce the BOSS Act. That's the Better Oversight for Secondary Sales. So we'll see if any real change come out of this, but, you know, Swifties have pushed it up the hill this far.
Well, listen, Savannah, thank you for that reporting. If I were to work a lyric in, it would be from Pearl Jam. I don't have the ability to do that on the fly, but we'll talk about it later. Thanks, Savannah. Appreciate it. More to come on that, I'm sure. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the Justice Department in 8 states are suing Google over its online ad business. The DOJ is accusing Google of having control over all sides of the online advertising market. Speaking of monopolies with Live Nation, that is the accusation here, that Google is effectively creating a monopoly. A rep for the company hit back today, saying that the Justice Department's argument could raise advertising fees and hurt small businesses. Number 2, a group of scientists today setting the doomsday clock closer to midnight than ever before. It moved 10 seconds forward to 90 seconds to midnight. That's a bummer. I mean, it's just symbolic, but these scientists say humanity is facing a time of unprecedented danger and that stuff like the threat of nuclear weapons, climate change, infectious diseases have increased the chances of a human-caused apocalypse. We will get more cheerful later in the show. Just stick with us. Number 3, New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern has made her last public appearance as prime minister. Remember, she stunned the country last week when she announced her resignation basically because of burnout. Her successor, Chris Hipkins, just got sworn in. Number 4, Mikaela Shiffrin, superstar skier for the U.S., has won her 83rd World Cup race today. This is the big deal because it's the most wins ever by a woman skier. She beat her former teammate Lindsey Vonn's record. She needs only 4 more wins to break a Swedish guy's all-time record on this. So 4 more, Mikaela, let's do it. Number 5, guess who's calling it quits after nearly 20 years? Panic at the Disco. No, they haven't been a band for 20 years. Are we that old? They're going to break up after their European and UK tour, which ends in March. That's according to the band's frontman, who says he and his wife are expecting their first child soon, and he wants to focus on his family. Man, 20 years. Bye. When we come back, Amazon adding a prescription perk for Prime members to get as much medicine as you need, as many prescriptions as you need for just a few bucks. We're getting into how it works coming up. Plus, the FDA putting some new limits on something in baby food that a lot of people may not realize is need limits at all. That's next. The FDA today cracking down on the amount of lead allowed in baby foods like mashed up fruit, veggies, and dry cereals. Yes, lead in the food that people feed their kids. It comes after studies found that these levels could be high enough to actually create a risk for the way that babies' brains develop, for the way that their behaviors develop. So the agency is proposing a maximum limit. They say could reduce lead exposure in kids by about 25%. Joining us now is Dr. John Torres. And Dr. John, a congressional report last year found that the levels of metal in baby food are actually higher than the levels of lead that's allowed in bottled water. I think it's surprising to people that this is even an issue at all. Help us understand why it's such a big deal.
And Haley, I agree with you. I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by this. In water, they say 5 parts per billion is the limit you want. Here they were talking about in some foods up to 73 parts per billion. So many, many times that. The FDA is now putting these guidelines out there. They're a draft guideline, meaning that they want people to comment, both experts and the general public, and then they'll look at those comments and decide on guidelines, hopefully by the end of the year. But in their guidelines, they did a couple things. Number one, they tried to go ahead and put parts per billion, a safe level of parts per billion, or I would say safer level, because there is no safe level of lead out there. And they compared that to blood levels of people who had lead exposures, especially babies, and felt that they got levels that were fairly safe enough, at the same time not restricting food to the point where food was limited, especially in areas where baby food might be hard to get. So they wanted to balance that out. So what they ended up doing is saying, okay, we're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to do 10 parts per billion for foods like yogurt, fruits and veggies, but 20 parts per billion for root vegetables, and particularly dry cereal, which tends to be the first food that babies get. And so that was a bit of a concern. But the concern is, with lead, it's not a one-time exposure, but it's a cumulative exposure over months and years, and it can cause growth developments. It can cause damage to the brain and nervous system, learning and behavior problems, hearing and speech, and lowered IQ. And some of those you might not even know as much, because it could be that their IQ is lowered by a few points, and without the lead, it wouldn't have been. They'd have higher IQs. And so those things are a little nebulous, a little hard to tell, but that's where they're going with it right now, and we'll find out over the next few months what they actually decide, Hallie.
I was interested to see in our research on this today that there are some nonprofit advocacy groups who say, yes, this is a good step. There are some nonprofit advocacy groups and researchers who think, wait, this doesn't even go far enough, though, right? That this really only targets food with the highest levels of lead, to the point that you're making here.
And that's exactly right. It doesn't take into account cadmium, arsenic, or mercury, some of the other heavy metals. But on top of that, some groups are saying, we should have absolutely no metals in there. And other groups are saying, we need to make sure we balance that with the food that's available, because it's impossible to get rid of all the metals. And so we'll see how that balance works out over the next few months, Hallie.
Dr. John Torres, thank you, as always. Amazon may be changing the game when it comes to how affordable your prescriptions end up being. Today, they've got a new benefit starting called RX Pass, where Prime members can get all eligible prescriptions filled as often as they need for just $5 a month. $5 a month. It's free delivery. It's available in most of the country, not all, 42 states. You see those states on your screen right there. Look for yours. It covers something like 50 of the most common generic medications that can treat stuff from high blood pressure to anxiety. It's all happening at a time when the fight over prescription drug prices is getting more and more intense, with prices for more than 1,200 brand name drugs going up on average like a third last year compared to the year before. That's why these generic drug prices are so important. Joining us now is Bertha Coombs. Bertha, this is a bit like Amazon is known for being like a disruptor and innovator. Boy, is this a disruption, right, to the prescription drug industry. The refills you want for just $5 a month. Who does this cover? What are the kind of conditions that this covers?
But these are just, well, this is for some 80 conditions, they'd say. And most of the ones are things like high blood pressure, heart disease, a lot of the drugs that a lot of people take. And some of them may take more than one. You might have high blood pressure. You might also have a heart condition. So you might have a hypertension drug. And in addition to that, you might need a beta blocker or something like that. High cholesterol is usually in the mix for skin conditions and allergies, seizures, and even some generic. Again, this is generic. You're not going to get the brand name drugs for this. So it's one of those things that if you're already a Prime member, you could get as many of these as you want for $5. But Hallie, you really should also check your own what your insurance is already charging. I was looking, for example, on our insurance plan for NBC. When I looked, a lot of those generics we already get for a $0 copay. So $5 would actually be an increase. But if you're on a high deductible plan, that could be a great deal for you.
That's a great point. Could this have a ripple effect in the industry, writ large, though, like more broadly, if Amazon is trying to do this for these generics?
It's one of those things that a lot of these larger pharmacies have already been doing. Walmart has a lot of generics at just $4. And again, a lot of the companies like CVS, they have their own insurance plan, and they have much deeper relationships with insurers. So they can offer a lot of discounts on different things. And the other thing I should say, while they do have some diabetes medications, this does not include insulin. And because of federal regulations against cash incentives on government plans, this does not include people on Medicaid or Medicare. And in order to get that $5 a month, you also have to be a Prime member, which is these days about $140 a year.
Yeah, you got to then pay for the Prime membership too. Bertha Coombs, all good points. Thank you very much. Good to see you. Coming up here on the show, what would you do if you saw what we're about to show you wash up on a beach? Well, some people turned it in, and that's some good news. We'll talk about it later in The Local. Some news out of the business world. You've got Microsoft barely beating expectations earnings. Earnings expectations, I guess. Shares are up by about 5% in trading after hours. That's mostly because of Microsoft's cloud computing business and its flagship cloud products, which grew a whole bunch. And interestingly, on the heels of thousands of layoffs just last week. That brings us to tonight's original with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching. And tonight, it's more on the stock market beyond this big bump for Microsoft tonight. The Dow closed today, trading on just modest gains. The trend for a lot of the U.S. market in the first few weeks of this year. Concerns of a recession have dragged down stocks here compared to gains overseas. It's more unwelcome news for those investors who got kind of burned in last year's downturn. A lot of them, what people call retail investors, meaning not like Wall Street people, but just regular folks, the people that like you and I would know, our neighbors who manage their own portfolios. A lot of them got into investing during the pandemic. Some made a lot of money, but for others, they got wiped out in a big way. Here's Brian Chung with more.
Alan Garcia and his wife invested their stimulus checks into the stock market as the pandemic began. Not even 3 years later, that money is gone.
At the end of the day, I didn't make any money at all. I lost my whole portfolio, which is very unfortunate.
Garcia did well initially, but when the stock market turned in 2022, Garcia doubled down on bets the market would go back up.
Sure enough, we never recovered. And yeah, I said goodbye to the stimulus checks.
In 2022, the S&P 500, a popular index fund made up of 500 big companies, lost almost 20% in value, making it the worst year for stocks since the 2008 financial crisis. That decline devastated the portfolios of rookie traders who picked up investing during the pandemic.
I know people that lost a lot of money.
As the pandemic started, new users flocked to apps like Robinhood, a popular commission-free stock trading platform. They report monthly active users quadrupled between December 2019 to June 2021. Marvin LaHood was one of those new users. He started investing using Robinhood and found Reddit forums online that fueled speculative run-ups in stocks like GameStop.
It was always small money until the GameStop, and that kind of opened my appetite, probably not a good thing, towards putting more money towards such speculative plays.
Those meme stock trades helped him break $1 million the same day his wife shared she was pregnant with the second child. His portfolio ballooned to as much as $2.2 million in 2021, but it came crashing down to just $200,000.
I had moments where I experienced mild forms of depression for the first time and had to rethink purpose of life and happiness and what matters to me.
Brokerages are now seeing waning enthusiasm among its users. Robinhood says monthly active users fell near pre-pandemic levels from June 2021 to November 2022. A Robinhood report says their user base shrank by 8.8 million. Meanwhile, financial services company TD Ameritrade says its users appeared to sell stocks into December as they sidelined themselves from a falling market.
The mom and pop investors probably aren't going to have as much to put in the market. We also see when when consumer sentiment starts to sour and turn south a little bit, people also are a little bit less willing to invest.
Both Garcia and LaHood have sidelined themselves from actively trading at the moment, but it all depends on the market.
I was a bit too obsessed. I'll definitely get back into it, but hopefully this year we'll see how the market does. It looks like it wants to reverse. So.
A hint of optimism after a brutal year for traders.
Let's bring in Brian Chung, who is joining us now. It's so interesting to hear about this, and especially at the end there where he's like, well, maybe I'll get in this year. We'll see how the market does, because there is also a very different school of thought that's like, get in and stay in for a very long time, right? Like, so that time outweighs any market's ups or downs. That's very different from the thinking of some of these investors here. What's the sense of people getting back into the market if they got burned last year?
Yeah, for what it's worth, we've seen so far, at least, it hasn't been long into 2023, but the S&P 500 has rebounded about 8%. That's not nearly enough to cover even a fraction of the losses that we saw last year. But as you point out, you heard from the likes of Alan saying, look, I could be convinced to come back into this market even after the psychological and financial damage that they sustained last year. But in talking with both Marvin and then also Alan, they both mentioned just what you said. They're going to have a little bit of a longer time horizon the next time they decide to get back in.
Brian Chung, thank you very much. Great piece. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From the Western Bureau, police in Washington state are looking for a suspect wanted in connection with a shooting early this morning that killed at least 3 people in Yakima. Police call this whole thing random. They say this guy opened fire at a convenience store and gas station parking lot. Also from our Western Bureau, a second hiker is missing on California's Mount Baldy. That's the same mountain where actor Julian Sands disappeared about a week and a half ago. Police say the search and rescue team was requested to look for a 75-year-old man who has not been seen since Sunday. Crews on the ground are now looking for both of these guys. From the Southern Bureau, more than $2 million worth of cocaine. $2 million worth of cocaine washed up on a beach in the Florida Keys. Border Patrol says some people found these packages and turned them over. Inside was nearly like 150 pounds of this stuff. Could you even imagine seeing that on a beach on your vacation? Still to come. Oscar nominations are out. The snubs and the surprises and the stuff you should see before awards night. We're talking about it next. After 2 years where streaming services dominated, it's the theaters back in full force at the Oscars this year. And the nominations for the best movies of 2022 give us some interesting clues about the state of the movie business. You see that in the 10 nominees for Best Picture. These are the so-called prestige films. The Banshees of Inisherin, Tar, The Fabelmans, movies that critics really like, but that people didn't really see. There are also fan favorites you probably did see that made big money. Top Gun Maverick, Elvis, the Avatar sequel. But the big winner is the Cinderella, the one that's kind of just right in the middle of both those categories. Everything Everywhere All at Once, leading the way with 11 nominations, including Best Picture, Director, Original Screenplay, 4 acting nominations. Bravo's Darren Karp joins us now. She's the host of Shaken and Disturbed. Can I just tell you, that's the one movie, like I don't watch movies, that's the one movie that I did see, right? So like, heart in the right place there. Yeah. But what's interesting is like what we can read from these nominations about the movie business writ large, because the obituaries were getting written for like the big studios, because the streamers were crushing just a couple of years ago. Very different story today.
Yeah, there's actually one streamer that's actually kind of playing a role in the Best Picture category. That's, of course, All Quiet on the Western Front, brought to us by Netflix. It's also the only international film named in Best Picture. But I got to be honest, for me, I watched most of these on streamers, so I think I'm the opposite of the public.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, so maybe I'm the odd man out here, but I still think streamers have a lot to play in this business.
Yeah, I watched Everything Everywhere All at Once on a streaming service. Like, I totally get it. And there's some history, at least when it comes to that movie, too, because these awards mean kind of a groundbreaking moment for Asian actors and Asian creators.
Absolutely, Hallie. I'm excited that of all the movies, you at least watch my absolute favorite one. I do hope this takes home Best Picture. Michelle Yeoh was my favorite actress. I'm torn between her and Cate Blanchett, but Michelle Yeoh for sure. I mean, she thought her career was over after 40 years, essentially, so she's coming back. And then Ke Huy Quan, we haven't really seen since Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones back in the day, as well as The Goonies. This is major for him. And I also want to point out Stephanie So, was just absolutely fabulous in Everything Everywhere All at Once. So this is big for a lot of Asian actors.
There's still a lot of room to go, right? There were no women directors nominated after 2 years of women winning. Yeah. We talk about sort of high-profile movies made by Black artists and creators that got totally shut out here.
Completely shut out. I mean, it's probably not surprising, unfortunately. It should be more surprising to people. I was really surprised by Sarah Polley not getting anything, considering that Women Talking, which I just actually recently watched, it's a beautiful film, was nominated for Best Picture, but she was notably absent from the director's nomination right there. And yeah, nothing for Nope, nothing for Till, nothing for Woman King. I thought, you know, Viola Davis was going to get something, but notably absent. So as much as the Academy is trying to be diverse, I'm not sure they're hitting the mark this year.
What about what should we be watching for from the actual ceremony itself?
Well, there's going to be a lot. I mean, I definitely think people should binge all these movies so people can have an actual opinion.
I cannot binge all of them. I'm going to be really. I can do one. If I'm going to do one, what should I watch?
Okay, I'm torn between Tar and Triangle of Sadness. I do recommend watching Triangle of Sadness because it's weird, but not while you're eating dinner.
Is there something that's fun? Are there any escapist ones besides Top Gun Maverick?
Well, certainly Avatar is going to be one of those wild ones that's really big. You know, that's going to be kind of the Banshees of Inisherin is really fun if you like Irish film. It is funny. It is also weird, but Triangle of Sadness actually surprised me, and I'm happy that it is in a Best Picture nom. But it is very, very weird and particularly gross, which I like.
Darren Karp. Well, now I'm intrigued. Weird and gross. Thank you for being my own personal Hollywood concierge. I deeply appreciate you. I hope our viewers do too. So thank you. That does it for us for this hour. Weird and gross. I think we have a new catchphrase. We're going to have more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. We will see you tomorrow. Weirdos, join us then. Bye.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.